I did want to ask you, I think it would be remiss of me not to ask you about the problem of anti-Semitism on sections of the right, or, the problem of Israelophobia on sections of the right, that kind of hostility towards Israel that we're seeing. You famously had a clash on Joe Rogan with Dave Smith, who I was not previously familiar with, I have to say. I don't think those two are anti-Semitic at all. I'm a big fan of Rogan. I think he's a great, curious guy who has a wonderful platform. But it was interesting that you found yourself having to push quite hard against a hostility to Israel coming from that section of the kind of commentator sphere. And we do see a lot of it online. Online, it gets very ugly. What do you think of what's happening on the right in terms of that hostility to Israel that exists, and also just the general sensibleness of debate on the right, which seems to be waning at the moment?
Yeah, I agree. I think it's definitely waning. It goes back slightly to something I mentioned earlier, which is, I find it very interesting. I think neither you nor I suffer from this, but most people have an affliction in politics, which is that a lot of people have an affliction in politics, which is they just take everything at the buffet of their side. It happens particularly when people change political sides, admittedly or otherwise. They just take everything. And I think that there is a element of that is completely understandable, and an element of it, of course, which is something for which one feels a certain amount of disdain. But I think that a part of the political right has certainly fallen into an anti-Semitic place and an anti-Israel place for sure. And I think they should reflect on, among other things, the fact that what has pushed them there. And there are quite a lot of things that have pushed them there. One is that it is, as I said earlier, it is, to rephrase something, it's a groove into which you can fall with alarming ease.
Yeah.
It's just there. There's a reason why anti-Semitism is such a long and powerful force across all sorts of different religious, ethnic, political things. It's a groove you can fall into with great ease because it's just there as an omni explanation. Everything from why are these things happening globally to why is my life not working out? It's just there for everything. And the reason why it's being pushed at the moment on the American right in particular is a very, very interesting thing. Some of it is simply organized by Qatar, the Iranian revolutionary government, principally by Qatar through funding of universities, institutions, media, and much more. The Qataris are responsible for a lot of pushing around. Again, as often happens, they are actually guilty of the thing that people accuse Israel of. It's like unbelievable compromising funding of the country's enemies and enemy narratives. So some of it is absolutely pushed. Others, it's there as an explanation. I've been very interested by watching this, and it's difficult to watch because it's hard to see where it becomes serious and actually breaks the surface. Why should a couple of comedians be having any kind of sway? I was interested watching Piers Morgan a couple of days ago, talking to the international lawyer, a friend of mine, Natasha Hausdorff, and being exceptionally rude and dismissive and disparaging and really unprofessional with her. Really unprofessional, just shouting that she was talking bullshit and not allowing her to finish an answer, and just such ugly hatred that he was expressing towards what was just a different opinion from the one that he's found himself holding. And he turns to comic Dave Smith and he says, these Israelis, they're treating us like that we're just clowns, sort of thing. Again, your other guest is literally a clown. That's his job. His job is to be a clown. The fact that I don't think he's ever said anything funny to my knowledge is, but it's like there in the name. Your job's to be a comic. You look a little bit at these people and you think, what do I have to pay attention to this? Where does it become serious enough that you have to pay attention? And I think it becomes serious enough that you have to pay attention when uh, this falls into a groove which is just highly recognizable, and if it falls into that groove and it actually has some impact, and it's quite hard in our current media and the social media landscape to work out what is impactful. So that, as I say, there's been a sort of flattening process whereby an international lawyer like Natasha Hausdorff, 20 years experience at the bar, is to be invited on as a guest with a comedian, and not just as equals, but actually as her then worse off.
Yeah.
Like her knowledge and expertise makes her less desirable to listen to than a comedian just riffing on stuff he's read online. And so there's this very weird media and social media landscape we're in. What I can see now is that the elements of the right that are playing with this stuff are doing several things. One is there's definitely an American isolationist thing, which is a recognizable strand, the Buchananite right. It's a long part of American politics, of the isolationism of we just don't care about the world. As I've often said, it's a paradoxical position, because the people who want America, these people want America to remain the world's superpower and the world's dominant power, but they don't want to be involved in the world. Okay, right, that's their problem to work out. But that isolationist tendency is there. Then you add in various other things, and they include, for instance, now a belief that somehow America would not be in trouble in the Middle East or any other region if it weren't for Israel. That America is somehow being tainted by association with Israel. And if we only cozied up to our real friends, Qatar, the Ayatollah, that would all be better. And therefore, Israel becomes like the cause of your problems.
Yeah.
But there are a lot of other things going on as well. One thing that I became very aware of when I was writing my book, The Strange Death of Europe, and trying to get an early sense of European movements of the right, was that there are also attempts to radically rewrite history because of the awkwardness of certain things that happened in history. If you are holding a view about what has gone wrong, I became very alert to right-wing movements on the continent of Europe, for instance, who, when you think like, why do you play around with things like this is on the fringes, but nevertheless, sometimes you sort of need to get a whiff of what is happening on the fringes to see what might come in. There was always a problem on the European right, that there were portions of it that would blame Israel and the Jews in particular for mucking up the whole cause of their ethno-nationalist project.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that if the Jews hadn't been massacred in the Holocaust, we could have got on with our ethno-nationalist projects, or our right-wing projects, or whatever. And the Holocaust and the Jews and the creation state of Israel causes a problem for these people. And you can definitely hear that on parts of the American right now, which is because of the 1940s, our desires and our projects got upset.
Yeah.
And therefore, what can we do? One is to try to deny that or try to get around it. Another is to play all sorts of games of the Buchananite tendency, which is, if we hadn't have got involved, then we wouldn't be in the problems that we're currently in. If we'd have allowed the Nazis and the communists to fight it out, we wouldn't have, American cities covered with fentanyl-laced drugs and, homelessness and all of these problems. It's a not very well thought out, but existing strain in American conservative right-wing political thought at the moment.
Yeah.
And I think it's very, very low grade. And besides anything else, is sort of always a futile thing, because conservatives in particular always have a tendency to sort of say, where is the moment that the thing went wrong? And that's very interesting as an intellectual exercise. And it's pretty hopeless as a political exercise because there's nothing you can do about it now.
Yeah.
I mean, like, if only in the War of Independence in America we hadn't done Y. Well, yeah, but we're here because history happened. And it's useful and interesting to work out where the things have gone wrong. And it's simultaneously slightly hopeless. But yeah, I'm still really, I'm watching this movement on the American right and it's still somewhat unclear exactly what is going on. But then that's because the movement itself is unclear and is trying to work out its own thoughts on the fly. But I think that one other thing I would say is I think a lot of the people who are in a very specific anti-Israel place are there because wittingly or otherwise they've been pushed there by the pressures of the time. Nobody is going to berate a television host or a podcast host for not having said enough about Sudan.
Yeah. Yeah.
And no campus will be protested and no graduation ceremony in America will be protested because of a lack of focus in that semester by the university administration on the killing going on in Sudan.
Yeah.
But there are these people from the university heads to the sort of Piers Morgans who will feel like they have to have a stance on like phase 2 of the conflict in Gaza. And they get pushed into it.
Yeah.
Wittingly or otherwise. I think largely unwittingly. Why haven't you spoken about this? Why haven't you condemned Y? Oh, so you're a supporter of Z.
Yeah. As you say, it's very low grade. I find it incredibly worrying. It's hard to work out how influential these strains will become, but there does seem to be a pincer movement of scapegoating at the moment. So the left scapegoats Israel and has been doing for some time, and now sections of the right are doing a similar thing.
Yes.
And the Churchill bashing, this kind of revisionism of history where Churchill was the bad guy and maybe Hitler was misunderstood. I mean, I know that remains a relatively fringe idea, but it's out there and it is incredibly worrying.
And it's not fringe once the world's biggest podcaster has people who believe that on his platform and they talk unchallenged.
Yeah.
Now, I mean, you can see there's a guy called Ian Carroll who has been a guest on Joe Rogan. You can see interviews that he does with other people afterwards in which he boasts about how he's slowly bringing in the Jewish question to Joe Rogan's audience. And that's what he calls it, the Jewish question. And he's bringing it softly, and he boasts about this. James Lindsay has reposted the videos on his Twitter that this guy is like, you can't go straight in on all of the heaviest anti-Jewish stuff, but you can introduce them to it. You can just ask questions and so on. And he's being congratulated by this anti-Semite for the brilliance of his maneuver in introducing Joe Rogan's audience to anti-Semitic conspiracy theory. And, I think, like me, Brendan, your view is, if I don't agree with it, I don't agree with it whether my own side is doing it or not. Yeah. And I don't agree with it whether people I like are doing it or not. Yeah. And I don't agree with it whether people with huge platforms that I could do with are doing it or not.
Yeah.
But it's very, very disappointing. I have to put it at its mildest. It is very disappointing that this is going on.
If something's morally wrong, it's morally wrong. And it doesn't matter whether you like the person pursuing it or you don't. Douglas, just two more quick questions for you. I want to ask you about a different form of anti-Semitism. So we've looked at the left-leaning version, the right-leaning version, but there's also the problem of Muslim anti-Semitism, which is the one form of racism you're not allowed to talk about, actually. You will be damned. I think it was Rod Liddle who said, we're now reaching the situation where it's Islamophobic to talk about anti-Semitism, because if you do, you'll be accused of bullying Muslims in Europe. How much of it, I mean, you've written about this at length. You've written about the strange death of Europe. You've written about some of these intersecting crises of our time. When I've gone on some of the anti-Israel demos over the past 20 months, strictly to observe them, not to take part, I have noticed a kind of unholy marriage between kind of bored bourgeois people from the leafy suburbs and young radical Muslims, radical Islamists, people who wear the keffiyeh and say, we want jihad, etc. How much of a problem do you think that anti-Semitism is becoming, and why are people so reluctant to grapple with it?
It really is, as you say, it is Islamophobic to mention Muslim anti-Semitism. And at some level, I think governments, police forces, and others just decide this is a numbers game. There are more Muslims than there are Jews in the world and in countries like Britain, and therefore it's just easier. Give the Muslims their Islamophobia, rights, and it'll all go away as a problem. I think this is profoundly misguided.
Yeah.
Islam has an anti-Semitism problem from the roots of the religion, and is undealt with. It's just not been dealt with. And, Christianity has had a long history of anti-Semitism. But if a Christian pastor or bishop or priest, anyone, stood up in a pulpit and said, we must kill all the Jews, it would be front page news, and all the leadership of the church would denounce the person in question, and Absolutely. They would have no future in the church. By contrast, not just in the Middle East, in England today, we have the videos that mosques across the country have post on their own websites. It's not like they're hiding it. We'll do sermons calling for the end times and the destruction of the Jews. And if people don't think that's a problem for everyone, I don't know. I mean, obviously, as I say, a country like Britain is in a stage of denial because we have massive immigration. We've imported a lot of Islamic extremism. We've imported a lot of people who hate Jews and hate Britain. And I think that there is a general feeling like, let's allow them to continue hating the Jews, and we'll worry about the rest when we come to it. It's just all so misguided. Yeah. The theological fundaments of Islam have a deep anti-Semitism problem, and that's because the Jews were among the first people to reject the so-called revelation of Muhammad. They just said, no, we've got our traditions, we've got our book, we don't need yours. And the fact that Muhammad himself, the inventor of Islam, killed Jews with his own hands, is a problem. I mean, that's a big problem. Mm-hmm. And if you're a Muslim, and what do you do about that? A lot of people say that that's just not the case. They pretend that their own text, or a lot of people don't know. Maybe. Certainly a lot of non-Muslims don't know that. But a lot of Muslims either deny that, or will just try to shut it down, get around that difficult corner by saying Islamophobia.
Yeah.
I would urge them to do a different thing, which is to deal with it and to get over it, to get past it. And it would be very good for the Muslim world as well, because if they decided to work with the Jewish state, for instance, in the Middle East, then you'd have a lot more success in the Middle East, and you'd have a lot less economic deprivation and much more, because all of the creativity and advances of the Jewish state could be shared with more with their neighbors. But it's a big problem for everyone else in the West, because, as I say, I mean, like, what do we think is going to happen? Really, what do we think is going to happen if the Muslim world doesn't address problems like that, and if the Muslim faith and Muslim faith leaders don't address problems like that? And they just don't. They deny it, and they prevaricate, and they push it away, and they throw Islamophobia out. But as I've said many times, you can see the consequences of Muslim anti-Semitism all over the world. You can see it in our own cities. And to get an idea of its toxicity, you've got to imagine that if the history of Christianity would be better or worse, if instead of the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus had called for the eradication of the Jews. To understand the problem of Muslim anti-Semitism, you would have to. The only way you could play it out would be, imagine if Jesus Christ had, by his own hand, massacred a Jewish tribe, and would the history of Christianity have been more anti-Semitic or less anti-Semitic if that's been at the foundations? And the answer, of course, is more.
Yeah.
And that's just a problem that is so big and so deep, and most people don't want to go anywhere near it.